Today, we are looking at a particularly interesting story in the Old Testament. It is the story arc of a king named Nebuchadnezzar, whose name I'm sure you all know, because it's a fun name to say. Even if you know nothing about the story, it's just a fun name to say. So we're looking at Daniel 4, but I'm going to start, spoiler alert, at the end of the story, and we'll get back to where we need to be, so don't worry about it. So Nebuchadnezzar is a bad guy in some ways, an interesting guy in other ways. His biggest thing is that a guy named Daniel interprets his dreams, and Daniel wins some favor with him as a result. It's important to understand that Nebuchadnezzar is an invading king. He has sacked Jerusalem. So he is Babylon, right, come to sort of take over the already sinful people, because they were sinful enough, but now Babylon is there to add sin to sin, I guess, right? So the end of the story is called Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation, and then Nebuchadnezzar's sort of restoration. And so it reads like this. Daniel has predicted what's about to happen. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar, and at the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king said, "Is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal city by my mighty power and my glorious majesty?" While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came down from heaven. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, the kingdom is taken from you. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the animals of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals, and gives it to whom he will." Immediately, the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society. He ate grass like an oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven until his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails became like birds' claws. When this period was over, I, now speaking, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. I blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever, for his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth were accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At that time, my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my lords sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are truth, his ways are justice. He is able to bring low those who walk in pride. This is the word of the Lord. So before we get to the story, are you all familiar with the term cryptid? Yeah, so a cryptid, right, is like kind of a creature that is born out of folklore, but some people think they're real. So there's like the Loch Ness Monster, who is 100% real, by the way. Things like Bigfoot, Mothman, right, the Chupacabra, all these kind of different monsters that there's a whole show dedicated to just trying to find these monsters, actually. And so they kind of blur the line for us between what is science and what is superstition, right? What is real and what is not. In fact, some people have even theorized that a cryptid can be willed into existence by our collective belief in it. That is how they believe Slender Man came to exist, if you're familiar with that particular myth, right? Something becomes so popular, we all start to believe in it, and it starts to actually exist. The cryptid differs from monsters of actual mythology, right, is in that some believe they are real, that they actually exist. Some people spend their lives looking for these things. Sightings are reported. Yes, sightings of all kinds of crazy things are reported in various places. They are subjects of research and study. There are whole college courses dedicated to the idea of studying these sort of paranormal things, right? They fuel the pop culture imagination of a world that is populated by monsters. There are even monsters in the Bible, right? Giants and all kinds of things. Leviathan and Behemoth, these kind of monstrous things. Monster movies happen to be one of my particular favorite genres. I grew up watching Godzilla endlessly as a child. And in movies, especially horror movies, right, we often find out that the scariest monsters are who? us, right? It's kind of an old thing, but it's still relevant, right? Yes, people. The monsters tend to represent our own beastliness, our own sort of ways that we hurt and harm the world and others around us. Some monsters play on that idea in more of a direct way. They aren't just monsters. They're like human and monsters at the same time. European folklore gave us something called the werewolf. I'm sure you've all heard of a werewolf, right? Some of the most popular of the Universal movies were about the werewolf, right? The Wolfman, I believe he was called back then. Human beings are being turned into wolves because they are either bitten by somebody who is already a werewolf, or they are cursed, in most cases, by some angry gypsy, which was a racist thing, but they are cursed in some way, right? They become these kind of shape-shifting creatures. They become these slaves to the lunar cycle, right? Every full moon, they have no choice but to burst out of their humanity and become these wolf-like creatures, right? The Native Americans have something called the skinwalker, which is similar, but it is actually anchored more in religion than mythology. So it's more serious, right? They don't even talk about this thing. They don't like to talk about this thing. It's an evil thing, right? Videos of sightings of these lycanthropes, another word for werewolf, right? These shape-shifting people do pop up on the internet. You can find people who claim to have filmed a werewolf, right? Or a skinwalker or something like that. And they always depict these kind of humans who they're just a little weird, right? They move a little funny, or their face doesn't make the kind of like a weird expression. Their eyes are kind of like blank or black or something, right? They're off. They don't quite move like humans. They don't quite talk like humans. Other videos do show unusually huge wolf-like creatures, right, roaming through the forest that people assume must have been a human at some point because it's too big, right? And so again, all kinds of stuff, right? And in the age of AI, everything's real, so it's really hard to tell what's a sighting and what isn't a sighting, right? Sometimes they are depicted as kind of dog-like creatures that stand on two legs, right? There's a rich diversity of explanations for their traits and why they are what they are and how they become what they are, right? They've been a staple of the horror movie genre for a very long time. Each time the full moon rises, a howl pierces the darkness, and the werewolf emerges because he cannot control himself. The moon determines his transformation. In some cases, though, there are legends that suggest, a la the Incredible Hulk, I guess, that it's anger and rage and sort of these incredibly extreme emotions that cause the transformation. It has nothing to do with the moon. Daniel, in his book, tells us the story of this king named Nebuchadnezzar. I admit that I had forgotten about this story until somebody actually recommended it to me for the Halloween sermon series. And so as I was reading it again, I thought, oh, this story is bonkers. I mean, it is just crazy, right? Daniel, and it meets Nebuchadnezzar because Daniel is called in to interpret a dream for him. As a result, Daniel sort of expresses how King Nebuchadnezzar is going to be this great and powerful king. And so, of course, Nebuchadnezzar likes to hear that. He likes to hear how powerful he is and how good he is and how great he's going to be and all that stuff, right? And so Daniel wins favor. I think he starts calling him Balthazar. He doesn't keep calling him Daniel. But and also three of Daniel's buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they also gain favor with Nebuchadnezzar until the day comes when, for some random reason, Nebuchadnezzar decides to erect a 90-foot golden idol, 60 cubits. I had to look it up. 90-foot tall golden idol of what we do not know. I have always suspected it was of himself, but it doesn't say that, right? So he has this giant idol. He's forcing people to worship this thing. People have to bow down to this massive golden thing, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse to do that. In response to their refusal, he attempts to burn them in a furnace. The flames do not harm them. They walk in, they're taken into this furnace, the flames are all around them, they don't touch them. Their faithfulness becomes their shield, right, against this man who's trying to destroy them. After they don't burn, Nebuchadnezzar learns his lessons really hard, right? So after he can't burn these three people, he decides to praise their God, right? Their God is surely this great and mighty God, right? And he decrees that anyone who blasphemes the God of these three men will be torn from limb to limb, and their households will be destroyed, because that sounds godly, right? So tearing people limb from limb and destroying their households is the way he wants to enforce faith among people. Then one day, he's on the roof of his great big fancy palace, overlooking his courtyard or whatever it is, right? And he starts to sort of brag about how great Babylon is, right? How great Babylon is because I built it. How great Babylon is because I made it. It is what it is because I am me and I am great. And so he sort of does this bragging, right? He's a fickle guy. His faith is sort of transactional. He only cares about God when it's sort of to his benefit, right? Or if he's being sort of punched in the face by God in some way, right? And so this begins what is the curse, I call the curse of the werewolf king, right? He begins to brag. Isn't Babylon fantastic? Now, I talked to you earlier, right? This is not Nebuchadnezzar seeing the moon and suddenly turning into a creature or anything like that, right? His source of transformation appears to be his own self-aggrandizing and prideful love of his own power, right? He loves himself more than anything else. This is Nebuchadnezzar I'm talking about. He loves himself, right? He prioritizes his own power, the acquisition of power. The appearance of power is superficially important to him. He lives in a golden palace. He erects golden Nebuchadnezzar, I'm talking about. He also lives from a predatory point of view. And this is what the werewolf is, right? This is what these creatures are. They become representations of our worst impulses, our uncontrolled worst impulses. They are when sort of instinct and intellect give way to brutality and insatiable appetite, right? The curse of the werewolf is the absence of self-control, combined with this deep, growling emptiness that can never be satisfied, a hunger that can never be filled, a need for self-control that can never be realized, where morality ceases to exist and all that's left is the beast. And so for a moment, Nebuchadnezzar, in this weird transformation, and what he looked like, I don't know. Like, I've tried to find artistic representations of this. All I know is he was hairy and eating stuff off the ground, right? So for a moment, though, he was shown exactly what it's like. Exactly what it's like when ambition and power and violence and the raw primal impulse takes over human rationality, human reason, human compassion even. In Nebuchadnezzar's case, the complete breakdown of humility is because of his immeasurable ego, his idolatry of the acquisition of stuff, his idolatry of himself, the offensive worship of worldly things that he had such a strong appetite for led to one of the most incredible, humbling, and what I think is truly one of the most bizarre moments in the entire Bible. A man became a beast. That is what happened, to display the beastliness that had corrupted him on the inside. He knew it was going to happen. Daniel told him it was going to happen. This is what your dream meant, right? And he sent away, he transformed into this thing. And the only image I could get in my head, right, was this idea of the werewolf, right? This man who just can't control himself anymore. God has taken away the guardrails. It's all just primal appetite now. And so he's this big, monstrous thing, right? A man who praised God when it helped him, praised God when it was good for him to sustain his power and his control over other people, and then raised idols when it didn't. Idols, I suspect, of himself. He denied that God had a role and a rule in human life, in kingly life even. An idea that frankly seems kind of quaint at this moment, that this poor man was punished for his lack of humility when we are living in a vortex of a lack of humility, right? The severity of the punishment was the result of God wanting him to understand that God rules everything, right? The result of denying the authority of God was to have the authority over yourself taken away, was to have your own control taken away. This is the God who tears tyrants from their thrones. This is the God who warned the Israelites that kings are a bad idea, they're always going to be a bad idea, and you're never going to like it. And he was right. And so God got involved in the way that kings ruled over the world, right? He lifted up some and he deposed others. And the greatest sin of the king, of course, is pride. The hubris of the king is pride. Replacing God with human rulers and human appetites. The sin of allowing our worst impulses to take over completely. So completely that we don't even look human anymore. Now, I know you're all super kind, nice people, and you never lose your tempers. But I'm going to confess, I can be a little beastly when I'm angry. In fact, my sister and I fight like wolves, I like to say. We love each other dearly, and we're going to make up afterward. But boy, when we're in it to win it. That's the way it goes, right? And so sometimes we do, though, right? We feel overcome with things like anger and outrage even. I mean, today, you can't walk through your kitchen without getting outraged about something, right? And so this sort of sense of almost uncontrolled outrage, this inability to filter out these things that are triggering us to feel angry and disempowered, right? Out of control. Living in a world where everybody wants to be the apex predator, where pomp and circumstance and power and wealth and self-interest become the way that we gauge our successes and our failures. Become our identities. What happens when the things you want, the things you crave, become your actual identity? Nebuchadnezzar found out. It's a beastly thing, right? The beast inside is a very familiar horror trope. In fact, there's a great movie called The Beast Inside, or The Beast Within. I don't recommend watching it, it's a little gross. But, werewolf movies have been a part of our lexicon for many, 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 many years, right? I will also confess, I don't watch a lot of werewolf movies because the transformation scenes gross me out. The scenes of them turning into the wolves, right? So anyway, it also happens to be a pretty familiar trope among humans, right? This idea that we can become these beastly things, right? We have come to believe that beastliness, these beasts are in fact our nature. We talk about the fact that these, this is the instinct of human beings, right? Is to be these kind of, I don't even know, bloodthirsty, craving monsters, right? That we are just violent by nature. We are just selfish by nature. Cruelty is just our thing, right? This is how we were made. This is how we were put together. Well, what immortal hand or eye framed that fearful symmetry, I don't know. But let me explain that is not the case here. The story of the werewolf is a story of somebody who becomes something that is no longer natural. It is fundamentally paranormal. It is fundamentally beyond the boundaries of what we believe to be ordered nature. The wolf, yes, the wolf exists in nature. The wolf has a role to play in nature. People are not wolves. And frankly, werewolves are complex characters. Dogs are pretty smart, I understand. But they're not natural. They're outside of what we understand to be natural. That's why we don't believe in them. A mythology, perhaps created to illustrate to us what our chaos looks like in action, what our cruelty looks like when there is no grace left, when there is no mercy left, what it looks like when violence becomes a thing that we are slaves to. It is a curse. To become a werewolf is to be cursed in films and stories. I guess Twilight aside, but that doesn't count as a movie. So it is a curse placed on people who are then suddenly driven by their darkest urges to the point of absolute tragedy. Werewolves' lives don't usually end nicely. When humility is silenced, when ego becomes insatiable, when self becomes so important, that the lives and the well-beings and the happiness of others no longer matters, well, then they're just prey. They are just people to be hunted for your own needs. They are people to be used and exploited to make you more powerful, to make you more wealthy, to make you more beastly. But in our story, the ending is different. This is not a traditional ending of a story like this, because Nebuchadnezzar gets the lesson. Unnatural, beastly, and horrible things, this desire for power and prestige that literally transformed him into a living monster, a caricature of what he was then followed by God recognizing that there was penance, there was confession. Nebuchadnezzar understood that what he was doing was wrong, that what he was doing was unjust, that what he was doing was corrupt. And what happened? He was restored. King to creature to king again. My reason returned, he said. That's his only comment. My reason returned. And he begins to praise God, right? He acknowledges that he was a prideful man. He acknowledges that the pride of kings is unjust. We know this. Kings destroy nations. The pride of kings cause wars. All of that kind of stuff, right? And then he encounters this God, right? This God who tries to humble the prideful. In this case, in a kind of extreme way, granted. But again, what is the solution? The solution to the beast, right? What is the solution? What is the solution to the violence and the rage and the predatory behavior? What is the solution to these unnatural, terrible things? What is the solution for the things that are transforming our culture into a realm of predators and prey? What is it that helps us stop it? What do we do in a world that makes monsters out of people? Because we live in a time that is far beyond the furry, feathery king Nebuchadnezzar. It is far beyond the clawing of power that we hear in this story. Well, no, I take that back. That was on purpose. We live in a world that puts werewolves and monsters in movies. We highlight the worst impulses. We bring out the things that are so scary to us. But the lessons remain the same. If you look past the claws and the fangs and the howling and the full moons, right? Our antidote, our werewolf prevention mechanism, the thing that stops us from giving in to beastliness, the thing that makes us less likely to become predators in an economic, political, and social way. The antidote is, do you want to guess what I'm going to say? It's humility. The antidote to the werewolf is to be humble. Restoration comes through the humbling of the beast, through the rejection of the beastliness, through the way that we say no to violence and we say no to the appetites that want to be satisfied regardless of how it hurts others. We say no to those things. Choices. We are given choices. We are not beasts. In fact, God gave us something that is so incredible we take it for granted, and that is the fact that we can think, we can reason. We become werewolves, we become Nebuchadnezzars through the curse of selfishness, violence in service of selfishness, appetite in service of selfishness. And I may have said this before too, but that is not who we are. We have choices. Choices that even some of our monsters must confront. We don't wait for the full moon. There is no uncontrollable transformation in the life of humanity today. There are no gypsy curses, although I am a little bit gypsy, so I might try if you're into it. We just have choices, right? The monsters among us are not manifestations of a natural human impulse. They are not manifestations of anything that is natural or normal or God intended. They are terrible reminders that we as human beings are made for more than hunting and hurting and wanting and needing. We are made for things like sacrificial love. We are made for things like charity and grace and mercy. And like Nebuchadnezzar, we are presented with the God of justice, the God of love, the God of mercy, and asked to choose between that truth, the depth of a human creature that was designed for love and community and peace, or to choose these monsters, these beasts of our cynicism, our fear, our weaknesses, our bigotries, our idolatry of things that cannot love us back. There is an old phrase, I don't even know where it originates, right? I quote it all the time, that you are what you gaze upon, right? You are what you contemplate. We are what we believe ourselves to be. We are what we believe in. This may come as a shock to you, but I don't believe in werewolves. Amen.